That was CGTN at the table. And today joining me around this table are two very beautiful and some guests. First of all, it's Sean Callebs. Welcome, Sean. And he was my colleague back in DC. And I haven't seen you for a while. It's this most important political event that brings you here all the way from DC.
It's great to catch up under these circumstances.
It is. And also here, this beautiful lady is our correspondent based in Nairobi, Africa. And she is Jane Kiyo.
Thank you for having me.
And maybe you might think this lady look a little bit familiar because she is the one who raised a question on behalf of CGTN to Minister Wang Yi. So let's just, why don't we just start from that? So how was it? Because today, because now we're giving more chance to reporters like you from overseas, but still it's like a little bit more than half the questions are by like Chinese reporters. So as one of the people who, as a foreigner, to ask a question to our foreign minister, how was it feel? And just tell us a little bit behind-the-scenes story. Sorry.
Well, first of all, I was surprised just by the number of journalists that were in that room. You guys could tell.
Fully packed is the right word,
exactly.
Right? Fully packed.
And again, we had to get there early morning. I left the hotel.
How early was that?
7. Thinking it's too early because the presser begins at 10 a.m.
Right.
And you get there and you find a battery of journalists, dozens of people queuing, and you're thinking, okay, so what are we up against? So initially I knew it's a big deal, but now when I arrived at the media center is when I kind of had an idea, okay, I think this is really huge. Because first of all, you're seeing the kind of interest that is in it. Of course, it's all about China outlining its foreign policy, and most likely the entire world is interested in this. This is where you get to know what a country is thinking externally and its next course of action. So it was nice. It was a nice privilege, I think.
But how many questions did you prepare? Because we know that for me and Sean, and also for you, like every time before we attend press conference, usually we prepare more than just one question. Because like your question sometimes might be asked by us because it's the same interest. Sometimes I just prepare like a couple of them. So how many questions did you prepare?
Well, I've covered a number of VIPs, and it's sort of different from when you're covering regular newses and press conferences. So you basically have to, you first of all sit down as a media team and you come up with a set of questions. But because only the media house or like CGTN is only allowed one question, so you have to come down to that one question.
Gotcha.
So you've got so many good questions you'd think, but you have to settle for that one. And you've got to give it to today, like the Foreign Ministry, to see whether they'll approve and put you down. Not really approve, but rather put your name down. That CGTN
when they
is
have
going
an idea, at least they have an idea about like which media want to ask what
which
kind of question.
Exactly.
So that, but you don't know.
Prepares.
You don't know for sure whether they'll pick you until the last minute.
That you do not know.
Or other people, they might have similar questions. And sorry to interrupt because now we are doing this live streaming on a variety of platforms. This includes, so remember to follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and CGTN app as well as Weibo. Okay, hopefully I got them all because we're growing fast. So this number is growing and growing. And also because Jane, for some of the viewers on the digital platforms, they might haven't get the answer, or they don't have the idea about like, what's the answer about your question to the minister. Can you just briefly tell us what did you ask and like what is the answer? What is the highlight of his answer?
Well, I focused my question on one very important meeting this year. It's going to be held in Beijing. It's the FOCAC, that's the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. It's a big deal because this is a meeting meant to strengthen relations between China and Africa and basically open up dialogue where the two sides can actually invest in different fields, agriculture, media. It's been going on for a while. I think this will be like the 6th FOCAC summit. And the last meeting in Beijing, why it's also a big deal, the last meeting that was hosted by China here in Beijing was about 12 years ago under different leadership. And given that China is constantly evolving and its role globally is also evolving, this is why it's such a big deal. But anyway, I asked basically what China expects from that summit, the kind of outcome they are hoping, and also just kind of weighing in on China's relations with Africa. Of course, there's been a lot of criticism. There's been lots of views, whether they're getting it right or wrong. So basically, Foreign Minister Wang insisted that the relations are solid.
But first of all, no, before he answered the question, he actually said some congratulatory message about CGTN, saying, yeah, like we have made, CGTN has made big progress. I think made you feel honored about it, right?
I did, and he seems to be a fan of CGTN, I would say. I think last also was previewing some his response last year, and he said something like he really watches CGTN
every night, and
which is a good thing.
Sorry to interrupt. So go. Sorry, go ahead with your.
He also congratulated the women.
Oh,
how cool is that?
Yeah.
He started his press conference by first congratulating all Chinese women. So I figured, I meant all women. All women.
Are you gonna congratulate us on that as well?
I do every day of my life. So.
Thank you, appreciate it. So go ahead.
Yeah, so he talked about strengthening the relations, and he also mentioned about China stepping up its role in terms of mediation, which is big. And he mentioned flashpoints, which are conflict areas, which we have not seen previously. And what I got from that statement is that China is kind of taking more responsibility as its status in the world changes. So he touched on that. He touched on the OBOR, the One Belt, One Road.
The Belt and Road,
Yes.
So critical.
So,
Very critical.
So Sean, because I know you've been watching closely about the press conference this morning, and you saw Zhang raise this question, and also Minister Wang answering so many questions about China-U.S. relations, about China-Japan, about the peninsula issue. So what impressed you the most, and what kind of impression and message did you get from the press conference?
I think the thing that impressed me the most was he just went on for 2 solid hours, and the questions just came and came and came.
Some of them are really sharp.
And he is such a poised international figure and so good in diplomacy. He was ready and handled everything. But I do think it's important when we talk about Belt and Road and talk about China and Africa, and he also mentioned at one point there are a lot of people, he didn't name the U.S. by name, that predicted China's economy would either have a hard landing or China was reaching out trying to supplant maybe the United States or other nations. And he said both of those have not proven to be true. So he said just look at what we are doing. He talked about at one point, he always has these wonderful sayings. How
Chinese poetry or other.
Yeah, exactly. He talked about the white caps in the ocean, that they may be great to look at, but they dissipate very quickly.
Yes.
And so he talked, I think that he talked about that in terms of the way the United States and the way many people in the U.S., including the Trump administration, are viewing. If you look at what happened a year ago when Donald Trump met President Xi Jinping in South Florida at Trump's plush Mar-a-Lago retreat, they left there. They were talked about being good friends, even used the Chinese term "old friends."
Old friend, exactly.
It's a very important term. And how things have changed so dramatically in just 1 year. Now Trump is threatening tariffs. He could sign as early as
the trade relations suddenly get so tense, right?
So tense right now. And I think it's very important for China to talk about its way forward, but also look where it came from. It's still a developing nation, lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in the last 40 years. This was a nation that 40 years ago was close to, what, 80% in poverty? Now talking 3 to 4%. And the very, the term they use now is, let's go that last mile. It's going to be very difficult to get the last 3 to 4% because they live.
It is the hardest.
It is the hardest. They live in autonomous areas and way out there, but it is going to be important. And China's been able to do this and not saddle itself with huge social welfare debt. In doing this. So I don't know if it would work in other nations, but it's working here.
It's working in China.
That's what we have, the system with the Chinese characteristics. It might not work in the States because of these geopolitical differences, the distances, but somehow it worked here. And sometimes maybe it could be applied to Africa or to other countries. Like, you never know. And also, Sean, because I know in the past 2 days, including Jane, that you have done some interesting stories, interviewed some good people, including me. I'll just start by myself.
Sure.
So like yesterday, I went to interview some deputies, NPC deputies from Guangdong province, because that's the province where President Xi Jinping joined a panel discussion with.
Right.
So, and maybe you know the Guangdong province, right? Because there's some really famous figure from that province as NPC deputy this year, like Po Nima. You use WeChat.
He also was one of the individuals that come through in the deputies corridor. He and the very famous astronaut came out. So it was nice that you had those individuals ahead of time to talk about this is what we expect and answer questions.
Exactly.
It's something that feeds the media and allows them to get their questions.
You don't have to drag them, to chase after them. Now there's this corridor that you can just like stand there, Yeah, so I interviewed them right after they finished their discussion with President Xi, and I just asked them, like, because at that time, you know, the press release has been out. We don't know what exactly was touched upon, so we just asked them. I interviewed like 10 deputies about like what was touched upon and what is the reaction of President Xi, and you know, what did you tell them, tell him, and how was your reaction? Because for most of them, it's actually their very first time to meet President Xi in person. So you're lucky. You're here to cover this. So, but for most of them, it's like a political figure that they only see on TV.
Sure.
The same thing for maybe Americans to see president. The same thing in Kenya. So, and he's the head of a village, and he's also among the people who delivered a speech to President Xi yesterday at the panel. So he was like so passionate and also so emotional moments. He said that, you know, his tears almost came down when he met President Xi. He said, I never imagined that one day in my life, as someone from the grassroots level, I could meet him in person, and he could even listen to my speech for like a couple of minutes and write down notes, and also interrupt for some more follow-up questions. So it was like that. I also interviewed Pony Ma and also a couple of more. So they answered questions about the reform, about you know, the opening up, because we know Guangdong, especially Shenzhen, the frontier is now turning into an innovation hub. So it's like one of the top tier cities that are now witnessing great and dramatic changes, as well as shifts and economic growth. So it is these information. You never know what is happening to China until you talk to them. And it's like a wide breadth of people. You have different ideas. So Sean, or Jane,
I think we had different experiences tracking down delegates, because I was able to get in the Beijing hotel, and we grabbed a lot of delegates.
Beijing hotels were like the delegates from
exactly.
which?
Well, there were from Shanghai.
A couple of them.
Right, right. And there were some that were coming, and they were going from work group to work group.
Right.
And we got one from the Northeast province who talked about agriculture. So it was very easy for us, and even the ones who either didn't have time or didn't want to talk on camera did take a few minutes to answer our questions and clarify things. But I thought it would be much more difficult to get delegates to talk, but it really wasn't. And we were talking about where is China going on the world stage, economically, development, security, because they have so many peacekeepers out there that the rest of the world may not know about. I mean, Africa
especially
and China.
in Africa,
Exactly. But the U.S., it doesn't get that kind of attention. And also the environment. If indeed the United States pulls out of the Paris Climate Accord, like U.S. President Trump says it is going to, it is going to leave China as the global leader in the environment. And that's significant, because China was blamed for
a lot of stuff.
Well, not just a lot of stuff, but sort of short-circuiting the effort to do this at Copenhagen back in, I think, 2008. I'm working from memory there. And so now, you know, you have a growing middle class, people who
but it turning out like U.S. become the first one to withdraw from the Paris disagreement.
The only one. I mean, you have every nation on earth except Syria now, and Nicaragua, because they said it didn't go far enough.
The first and only.
So it's important, you know, if you think about that, and the middle class here that is demanding changes. They don't want to breathe the air that is in Beijing. Now today was beautiful, but
most of the days are now beautiful in Beijing.
Right. And so people want change, and President Xi, his presidency certainly understands that, and they're leading. If you think about where they've gone in renewable energy, they were way behind, and then running neck and neck, and now they're the global leaders in solar power and wind power. So China is certainly a developing nation, but it's its own world. You know, it's also leading in technology.
And for those of the viewers who just joined us, and this is our third round of CGTN at the Table, covering this special Chinese important political event, the 2 sessions. And you can also follow us on, sorry, I have to take a look. It's my GT. It's Facebook, YouTube, CGTN app, as well as Weibo. So John just shared with us like his witness as well as observation about China's rise on the world stage. And this is also touched upon by Minister Wang Yi today. And at the press conference, he said that the allegation that China will replace America's role in the world is fundamentally wrong. He used the word fundamentally wrong, which I believe that it's a very, very strong stance on China. Because I used to work in DC together with Sean, and also I think I was shocked when I first got there about this kind of like, you think because now China is the second largest economy in the world, and we cover like there's a great attention on China, but sometimes I was just so surprised about like people actually don't know about China.
Absolutely.
And I was there
Africa. A lot of people think it's one nation. it's a whole continent, so it's
yeah, exactly.
54.
54.
54. That's a lot. 54 nations, great. So I was so shocked at the beginning about people's either ignorance or people's misunderstanding
Lack of
about
education
China.
is what I would maybe say.
Or it takes time for them to have a better understanding.
Right.
Like for Africa, because now this is like a new area or new frontier that China starts to make more investment, build more projects, especially infrastructure projects, including the train, the bridges, the roads.
Jane was talking about the
stadiums.
way the U.S. and other nations are looking at Belt and Road, but what does it mean for Africa?
Right. And also there are so many allegations about like now the Africa is becoming a new colony of China.
Exactly.
So like as someone working for a Chinese state media for almost 6 years, and also as someone from Africa, how do you feel about this stuff like that?
Well, I think like most stories and issues, it depends on where you stand, and you'll always hear the pros and the cons, and there are all these allegations, and people will always view things, rather putting it shortly, everybody has a worldview, depending on where you stand.
Where you stand.
Yeah, so of course the issue of China, recently we've had Tillerson, the US Secretary of State.
Right.
He's currently on a tour of Africa, and he's really made some
Which
strong...
country?
He should be visiting several African countries, Ethiopia, I think Kenya is one of them, Nigeria. He should be heading to Rwanda as well. But he made very strong allegations and strong statements, if I can say, about China's economic policies in Africa, and one of them was what you're saying, that it's turning Africa into neocolonialism, colonialism, and it's burdening Africans with debts. He's saying those are bad debts, they're cheap loans, and so there are those allegations. But then you've got this other group of people who say, you listen, the Chinese came and they've actually showed us what it is they're doing. They're putting up buildings, they're repairing roads. Fine, the West was there way before, but they constantly gave us debts attached to something. And the West will argue their point of view, saying, we are giving you with conditions so that you can make your institutions work, you can make democracy work. So both sides, you can try and get where they're coming from.
And it's not about only building the roads or building the infrastructure. It's that for this high-speed train projects, for instance, because it's also about training the people, the engineers.
And China has been doing a lot of that. I think every year it's been bringing delegates from politicians to thousands of students on scholarships.
I think also you have to remember that this is an economy. China's economy needs to have raw materials coming in and exports going out. It's a very robust economy. So as it continues to reach out with Belt and Road into Eurasia and into Africa, it's going to foster those relationships. People may look for some ill intent, but at the end of the day, it's trying to keep its economy going at 6.5% for the coming year, which is what we heard Li Keqiang say he wanted earlier, the premier, during his work report on Monday. And it's going to be very important because China has been the global engine since the recession or depression hit in 2008. And if China would take its foot off the accelerator, then what would happen?
China is the major contributor in world economy from then and also now. And maybe in the next couple of years, China is like still the leading contributor of the world economy. If the U.S. still playing hard on trade about China, it's not. It's
and also
doing
closing. It's doing very. It's nationalism is the thing. Trump's America first.
I think so. And
we're building a wall.
And up until now, I think until those statements by Tillerson, Trump's policy on Africa has not really been clear since he got into office. So
what do you think? You think it's clear enough as a veteran correspondent?
I don't think so. I don't really think he's laid down anything about Africa, and this is the first time we're seeing.
I think people are still confused where he stands on Asia. You know, he still hasn't filled some of the top Asian posts in the State Department. So.
Yeah, so there's a lot that's going on, but also one other issue why there'll be allegations perhaps on China not getting it right in Africa. Perhaps from some critics, they will often say why they say neo-colonialism is because they'll say the Chinese will come with the money and they'll come with the workers. So they kind of feel there's no balance where the locals, because you know, when you're bringing development and aid, there's got to be a balance where the locals are able to benefit in terms of employment. So the critics will also raise some of those questions, some of those concerns, that the Chinese are coming with a lot of their people, so fine, they're building the roads, but the employment is still very much on their side.
And let's remember, Wang Yi was asked very specifically today about these issues. So it wasn't like he was ducking any of these
No,
allegations.
actually
They were
said
He
posed
was
it.
there.
so
Yeah.
open to every question and didn't turn down.
And
any of them.
he also said that it can never be smooth. So I think he's
He's ready. We're confident for
Yeah,
all the challenges.
he's well aware about some of the challenges that are going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What about in the States, Sean? Because, yeah, I used to work there as well. As I said, the limited knowledge of people, especially when I first arrived in the States and, like, I start to make friends and they're like, oh, you work for a state media of China. And they start, like, criticizing, you know, some stuff
Yeah,
like...
check your
but-
credibility at the door, that
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
thing.
but they never even watch our show. I was like, first of all, you have to watch our show and then you can make a comment, it's fine.
Yeah.
But there's so many people who just have never been to China and all they see on the US media are either like mine explosion or it's like all the bad news or
Well, yeah, and-
so what happened
Or
there?
the China bashing during the political campaign, you know,
Yeah.
which really...
The China card is always turned out, unfortunately, to be one of the most efficient cards to gain its voters.
And one of the most frustrating things is they talk about China stealing
Jobs from the
And
States
if
for
you look,
so many years.
But
Yeah.
if you look at the way technology is moving, technology is taking
Right.
away more jobs than that. And then
Yeah.
also, I think we also have to look at how China, President Xi, moving forward with renewable energy. Trump wants to take a step back and let's make coal king again.
Yeah.
I'm from
Yeah.
West Virginia, which is a really cold country, and you know it's very difficult for people there. But coal is. No one sees coal becoming king again. With the greenhouse
Yeah.
gases going in and natural gas
It's going
being so cheap.
backwards. We're now going to renewable energy, but it's like going backwards.
And so, but it plays to his base, and that's
Right.
and it kind of warps the whole perception internationally. I think that people in Europe and certainly throughout much of Asia have a much different view of China and renewable energy than people in the United States.
But like for both of you who have been reporters for so many years, how do you think that, you know, like we can get not only a good image, it's not a good image, it's like more complete, more balanced image about China, as well as for Chinese people to have a better understanding about the States and Africa. Like before I went to the States about 7 years ago, when my grandma first know that I'm going to the States, she was like so shocked and almost in tears. Was like, oh my God, my child, I heard there's so many shooting in the States. Are you sure? Are you safe? Like, you're sure you want to go? I was like, Grandma, no, it's fine. You know,
Yeah.
like sometimes bad things happen, but still, you know, life goes on, and that's just like a tiny part of the entire picture.
Sure.
So it's not only, I'm not only saying, you know, this lack of knowledge or the limited knowledge from people in the States, also maybe from China to
Well,
the
it's a
outside
great
world.
place
How
to
can
live, and I'm sure you know that as well
Yeah,
if you're
yeah, I
spending your
love
time
it.
there. But
Yeah.
I think that one way is if for the public to see the things that Wang Yi talked about today and to hear the work report that came out, I think if, you know, he talked about South China Sea, and to a lot of people, that is a real big unknown. What's going on out there? I know.
And it's kind of sensitive as well.
It's very sensitive, and
Yeah.
he talked about it at length. Like, okay, if the U.S. he didn't use the U.S. by name, which I thought again he's
He didn't. Maybe it's not U.S. So
but he
Some
talked about
countries.
armed military aircraft and
Right.
warships going through the areas. I don't think there's too many others that have been doing that. And if you're going through, the chance of something that happened that could spin things out of control is certainly something nobody wants.
Right.
And you know, and I think that there's this big confusion in the United States what's going on there. But if they had a chance to hear
to
someone
talk
like,
to the people, different opinions, and maybe even go there to travel extensively.
well, just to
like,
hear
you
what Wang Yi had to say about it, because he
Right.
answered it in depth, I thought, you know, and to talk about that, I think that could go away toward allaying concerns, because if the United States has said that their concern is about adversely affecting shipping traffic, look, name one time when China has done anything remotely like that, and then you can make that argument.
Right.
But it hasn't.
never happened. Why just make that accusation? And also, but I think China realized that the Chinese government actually started to realize that problem, like because now even though we're already the second largest economy in the world, this like people like the other countries' understanding about China doesn't match its economic status. So now we're trying to be more open, more transparent. And maybe I think you two sitting here are the best examples because you're invited all the way from Africa from the States to cover this political event.
Exactly.
Like for so many years, we like either the party's Congress and the People's Congress are not open to foreign media for some period of time. But now we're open to like so many journalists from abroad, I think that's one of the best evidence to show that message.
It is, and I think I got the opportunity to do that story when I got, on Monday when I covered the foreign observers and the diplomats, which I think is also a plus, and it simply shows that the country is opening up, because I've never covered the 2 sessions before, but I can imagine before, years before, it wasn't always like this, where you have diplomats, you have foreign observers coming just to listen.
We don't have the corridors, the first setup. We have the corridor for ministers, but we don't have the corridor for deputies.
And from what I understand as well, ministers now are mandated by the government to come out and answer. They have to answer questions.
Whether they're good at answering questions or not, they have to stand there and take the questions from journalists.
Tell
them what they want.
People in the U.S. don't know that.
And they don't know.
That's why we need you to cover that to people like us.
So it's more transparent, I think, than people give it credit for. I'm not saying it's completely transparent.
But it's improving.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. And also I remember, like, during the 19th National People's Congress of the CPC, like, so many foreign guests were invited to witness the first lineup of the political leaders. And at that time, I remember President Xi, when re-elected as the general of the CPC, said that he actually welcomes all the journalists from home and abroad to walk around China. He said that we don't expect you to only cover the positive stuff and the good news. We want you to have this complete image of China. So he welcomes the reporters to come around, make vivid as well as in-depth and balanced reports of China. So
it was also interesting to hear them talk about the DPRK as well, because that's something everybody in the U.S. is focused on right now.
Yeah.
And if indeed they can get Kim Jong-un to move forward and freeze his efforts to develop nuclear weapons, at the same time get the U.S. to stop holding military maneuvers right off the coast.
The crucial time.
Yeah, it's very crucial.
But also Wang was very... he also sent a bit of messages in that with the DPRK when he said we need to gauge everybody's sincerity. We've walked this road before. Yeah. We're not so sure. We can say we want to talk, but we're not so sure. But let's see whether everybody is sincere, but we still insist that dialogue is the only way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and China also provides some other solutions. For instance, the 2 suspension approach to that, and also now it gradually turned out actually is one of the most effective way to solve the peninsula issue.
So I think in short, we're seeing China asserting its role globally. It's doing so subtly, and there appears to be some sort of strategy. Yeah. And like you mentioned, it's getting criticism from right, left, and center, because when you're doing something, you cannot always be right, or somebody will still find something wrong with whatever you're doing.
So be careful about what you said today.
Exactly. But either way, we're seeing, I think, China finally asserting itself. Even from what Wang Yi said in terms of mediating conflicts in Africa, that was huge.
That was huge.
That was huge. Slowly they've been doing that. I think we've seen Chinese diplomats in Africa kind of mediating the South Sudan crisis. They did that. And also try and resolve the Eritrea-Djibouti border dispute, which was going on. But today when he actually mentioned it, that, you know what, we're going to step up those efforts. For me, it meant something. And they're still China is still maintaining there's still non-interference. But I think in a way now the message I would get from that is that, fine, we're taking more roles, because our status also globally is
it's
rising.
not like 2008 during the Copenhagen.
It's also, eventually, China is going to be the world's largest economy. It's going to happen.
But it really doesn't want to.
But
he kept saying no.
That's my whole point. That it doesn't
we don't know yet.
It doesn't want to push the U.S. out of the role that it has traditionally claimed. And I think that's very important.
We need time. We need time.
China's message has not changed. Moderately prosperous, middle class, build this economy, create a very solid international base for business to come here.
Wow, that's all. Wow, he made it perfectly right. Like the prosperity. You're good.
Let's
just learn from the two. Yeah.
So it's
do your research.
There's a lot going on, and I think if people spent more time going in, I mean, I've heard a lot of experts on the air. who have been critical of some of the stuff that China's done. So there has been a mix of voices too out there, and that's important.
We can't do it fully right, but we're at least trying to improve, and maybe that's why. And also maybe one of the best ways for us to have a better understanding about China is watch CGTN as well as CGTN app. And I think that wraps our CGTN at the table today. So thank you so much, Jane and Sean, for joining us, and also thank you so much for our viewers to give a close attention on it. So have a good night. Goodbye from Beijing.